It's 9:47 a.m. in the morning on April 12, 2018. Route 7 and Route 55, New Milford, Connecticut. A quiet intersection where commuters pass through without a second thought. The kind of place where nothing ever happens. A red pickup truck rolls to a stop at the stop sign. Inside, Katie Fusco, 20 years old, sits in the passenger seat. Her adoptive father, Tony, 56, is behind the wheel. They're making their usual Thursday morning trip to Waterbury to help clean Katie's grandmother's house. It's routine. Boring. Even. The kind of errand that defines small-town life. A white van pulls up alongside them. Katie doesn't notice. Tony glances over for half a second, then back at the road ahead. He's checking for traffic, waiting for the right moment to pull out. The driver's side window of the van rolls down. What happens next takes less than 10 seconds. A New York firefighter driving behind them later tells 911 dispatchers what he saw. His voice is shaking. Someone just went by and shot somebody in a truck. The car pulled up, went around him, and shot him. Put a whole clipful into his head. The sound of an AR-15 rifle shatters the quiet morning. Glass explodes. The pickup's windows blow inward in a spray of blood and fragments. The shots don't stop. They keep coming. Head, neck, torso. Over and over until the magazine is empty. Katie and Tony don't have time to scream. They don't have time to understand what's happening. They die instantly, slumped in their seats as the red pickup sits frozen at the intersection. The van pulls away. No hesitation, no looking back. By the time the firefighter jumps out of his car and runs toward the truck, it's already over. 2 bodies. A quiet Connecticut morning turned into a massacre. How does a father end up murdering his own daughter and the man who saved her life? How does a love story between a parent and child turn into something so twisted that it ends in a bloodbath at a rural intersection? The answer starts 23 years earlier, in the suburbs of Long Island, with a boy who never belonged anywhere. Asterisk, before we go any further, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see how far this story reaches. Asterisk, Steven Walter Pladl was born on April 6, 1975, in Levittown, New York. If you've never heard of Levittown, picture this. Row houses stretching for miles, identical facades, working-class families grinding through life in a place where anonymity comes easy. It's the kind of suburb where people keep to themselves, where you can disappear into the background without anyone asking questions. Steven disappeared, but not by choice. From his earliest days, he was different. Not in ways that got teachers involved or social workers knocking on doors. Different in the quiet, unsettling ways that made other kids keep their distance. A former classmate who went to middle and high school with Steven remembers him vividly. He always wore the same hockey jersey, the classmate said. A San Jose Sharks jersey. Every single day. Never changed for gym class either. In middle school, he'd stay underneath the overhang during recess and just run around a pole. Literally. Just him, running in circles around a pole, never hanging out with other kids. The classmate continued. People made fun of him. And I felt pretty bad for him because he always seemed like a really quiet kid that stayed to himself. But if I look back now with my lens, I'd say there was something off. Something off. That's the phrase people use when they don't want to say what they really mean. When they sense danger, but can't quite name it. Steven didn't have friends. He didn't join clubs, or play sports, or go to dances. He spent his teenage years alone, fixated on objects rather than people. Old electronics he'd take apart and try to reassemble. Gun magazines he'd study for hours. Remote control cars he'd obsess over, spending money his family didn't have on upgrades and parts. His mother, Grace Pladl, would later describe him as having an explosive temper. The kind that could erupt without warning, transforming him from calm to enraged in seconds. Neighbors remembered a young man who rarely smiled, and when he did, it never reached his eyes. There was a coldness there, an emptiness. By the time Steven hit his early 20s, he was still living with his mother in the same Levittown house where he'd grown up. He worked sporadically, bouncing between minimum wage jobs he couldn't hold down. His moods swung wildly. Withdrawn silence one day, volcanic rage the next. He collected firearms. He spent hours online in the early days of the internet, back when chat rooms were the Wild West and predators roamed freely. By 1995, Steven had discovered something more dangerous than firearms: the internet. In 1995, the internet was still new territory for most American families. Dial-up modems screeched their way into homes. Chat rooms were unregulated spaces where anyone could be anyone, where age and identity were whatever you claimed them to be. For a lot of teenagers, these online spaces felt like freedom, a place to talk without parents listening, a place to be yourself. For predators like Steven Pladl, they were hunting grounds. Alyssa Garcia was 15 years old when she met Steven online. She lived in San Antonio, Texas, in a conservative household where rules were strict and privacy was scarce. Like a lot of teenage girls in the mid-90s, she logged into chat rooms looking for connection, someone who understood her, someone who made her feel seen. Steven was 20 years old, 5 years older. But he didn't present himself as a threat. He was patient, understanding. He listened when she talked about her frustrations with her parents, her dreams for the future, the way she felt trapped in her small-town life. He made her feel mature, special, like she was different from other girls her age. This is textbook grooming. Predators don't start with violence. They start with validation. They isolate their targets from friends and family, making them believe that no one else understands them the way the predator does. They build a world where only two people exist, the victim and the abuser. Steven told Alyssa she was mature for her age. He convinced her that what they had was special, that age didn't matter when two people truly understood each other. He made her believe that the rest of the world, her parents, her friends, society just didn't get it. But he got it. He got her. Their online conversations became increasingly intimate. Steven was building trust, breaking down boundaries, preparing Alyssa for what came next. In 1995, Steven traveled from New York to San Antonio. He met Alyssa in person for the first time, and he began a sexual relationship with a 15-year-old girl. Alyssa's family found out. They were horrified. They warned her about Steven, told her he was dangerous, begged her to cut off contact. But Alyssa, like so many victims of grooming, didn't see it. She thought it was love. She thought her family just didn't understand. So she made a choice that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She ran away with Steven Pladl and moved to New York to live with him in his mother's house. At 16, Alyssa got pregnant. On January 29, 1998, at 17 years old, she gave birth to their first child, a baby girl. They named her Denise. The nightmare was just beginning. Steven's behavior toward the infant was wrong from the start. Not just neglectful, not just distant, actively, deliberately cruel. Alyssa later recalled finding bruises on baby Denise's body that she couldn't explain. Tiny finger-shaped marks on the infant's arms and legs. Dark purple welts that made her stomach turn. When she confronted Steven, he'd shrug it off. "Babies bruise easily," he'd say. "You're overreacting." But she wasn't overreacting. Years later, Alyssa would testify that Steven abused Denise by pinching her until she was black and blue, that he would stuff the infant into a cooler, closing the lid until the baby was near suffocation, then pull her out at the last second. Alyssa described living in a state of constant fear. "I was always on eggshells," she said. Whatever his mood was, everybody knew. And that mood was often not happy. A lot of yelling, a lot of things smashed in the house in front of our kids. Steven couldn't keep a job. Money was always tight, but he'd rather spend what little they had on toys for himself, remote control cars, new electronics, than on diapers or formula for the baby. The verbal and emotional abuse was relentless. He controlled every aspect of Alyssa's life. Where she went, who she spoke to, how she spent her time. He monitored her every move, isolating her from anyone who might tell her the truth. That this wasn't normal, that this was abuse, and the baby kept crying. Babies do that, but Steven couldn't stand it. He would close the door to the nursery when Denise cried, and when Alyssa opened it minutes later, she'd find him standing over the crib with a coldness in his eyes that terrified her. He wanted to be rid of the baby, Alyssa later said. He didn't like the crying. I saw the bruises. I feared for her safety. Alyssa was trapped. She was 19 years old, with an infant, living with a man who had groomed her as a teenager, isolated her from her family, and was now abusing their child. She had no money, no support system, nowhere to go. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. If Denise stayed in that house, she would not survive. So Alyssa made an impossible choice. The kind of choice no mother should ever have to make. At 8 months old, Alyssa put Denise up for adoption. Not because she didn't love her, because she did. It was so hard to give her up. Alyssa told the Associated Press years later, her voice breaking. But I had to because I wanted her to live and be happy. She contacted an adoption agency. Within weeks, Denise was placed with a young couple from Dover, New York, Anthony and Kelly Fusco. The adoption was closed, meaning no contact between the birth family and the adoptive family. For the next 18 years, Alyssa would wonder about her daughter. Whether she was safe, whether she was loved, whether she had been given the life Alyssa couldn't provide. Baby Denise was gone. Placed into the arms of strangers who promised to protect her, Alyssa thought she had saved her daughter's life. She had no idea she'd only delayed the nightmare. ***, kindly hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this case gets darker than you can imagine. ***, the baby who left Steven Pladl's house at 8 months old arrived in Dover, New York, with a new name and a new future. Denise Pladl became Katie Rose Fusco. Tony and Kelly Fusco weren't wealthy. They lived in a small gray trailer in a crowded mobile home park near Route 22 in Wingdale, a working-class community in Dover, Dutchess County. The kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names and people looked out for one another. The trailer wasn't much to look at from the outside, but inside, it was filled with warmth, laughter, and unconditional love. Anthony Charles Fusco, everyone called him Tony, was born on September 18, 1961, in Waterbury, Connecticut. Right out of high school, Tony joined the United States Coast Guard. Over 30 years, he rose to the rank of Chief Petty Officer, serving his country with honor and dedication. After his Coast Guard career, Tony worked for 20 years as a correctional officer at the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut. He retired in 2017 and took a part-time job as a security guard at the Cricket Valley Energy Center in Dover Plains. But Tony's life wasn't just about work. He devoted himself to his community. He served on the town of Dover Zoning Board of Appeals. He was a member of the Music Boosters of the Dover Union Free School District. He belonged to American Legion Post 1949 in Wingdale. He was the kind of man who showed up, who helped, who cared. On September 24, 1983, in Syracuse, New York, Tony married Kellyanne Good. Together, they built a life. Not a flashy one, not an easy one, but a good one. And when baby Katie came into their lives, they poured everything they had into giving her the childhood she deserved. Katie grew up knowing she was adopted. Tony and Kelly had always been honest with her about her origins. But she never felt like anything other than their daughter. She was theirs, and they were hers. And that was all that mattered. Her uncle Kerry Good gave her the nickname Pac-Man because she was always snacking. It was a running family joke that Katie wore proudly. She had her dad's sense of humor and her mom's big heart. She was loud and funny and fiercely protective of the people she loved. The Fusco home wasn't fancy, but it was full of inside jokes and shared meals and the kind of love that doesn't cost a thing. From an early age, Katie showed remarkable artistic talent. She started by copying her mother's old drawings, presenting each doodle and sketch and painting to Kelly like they were masterpieces. And maybe they were. Because soon, Katie's own talents blossomed, and she became known around Dover High School for her spontaneous comic strips. In a post on her online portfolio, Katie wrote that a pen and something to draw on became a safe place for her. "Ink became my weapon against rules and regulations," she said. There wouldn't be a corner in a classroom or park that didn't have a secret little character living on it. Katie was more than just an artist. She was passionate about social justice. At 18, she completed a portfolio depicting the struggles faced by women throughout American history. She led a group of female students who petitioned the Dover Board of Education to change what they considered a sexist dress code. She wasn't afraid to speak up, to challenge authority, to fight for what she believed was right. Katie loved animals with a special fondness for rescuing stray cats. She'd bring them home, nurse them back to health, find them families. She couldn't stand the idea of anything suffering. She was a vegetarian not because someone told her to be, but because she couldn't bear the thought of hurting animals. Her empathy seemed effortless, woven into the fabric of who she was. She was also a superior drummer. Music was another outlet for her creativity, another way she expressed herself. She had rhythm, energy, a presence that filled whatever room she walked into. Katie graduated from Dover High School in 2016. Her mortarboard bore the phrase, "Finally out," a celebration of new beginnings and the future she was eager to build. She had plans. Big ones. She intended to attend Dutchess Community College to study art, with dreams of working in online advertising. She talked about moving to the city, working for a creative agency, designing visuals that would inspire others the way art had always inspired her. Her teachers remembered her as friendly, thoughtful, and deeply creative. The superintendent of the Dover School District, Michael Tierney, said, "I'd see her walking around in the halls once in a while. She was well-spoken and a nice kid. She came from a nice family." To anyone looking in, Katie had everything ahead of her. Talent, supportive parents, dreams worth chasing. But there was one missing piece that nagged at her. One question that wouldn't leave her alone, no matter how much love surrounded her. Where did I come from? In August 2016, Katie Fusco was 18 years old, freshly graduated, standing at the edge of adulthood with her whole life stretching out in front of her. But that question, where did I come from, wouldn't let her go. So she did what a lot of adopted kids do in the age of social media. She went looking for answers. Katie reached out to her biological parents, Steven and Alyssa Pladl, on Facebook. The message was simple, curious, hopeful. She explained who she was, the baby girl they had given up for adoption 18 years ago, and said she wanted to meet them. For Alyssa, the message was overwhelming. The daughter she had given up to save her life was reaching out, alive, well, thriving. It felt like a second chance. A chance to finally tell Denise, now Katie, the truth about why she'd made that impossible choice all those years ago. For Steven, it was something else entirely, an opportunity, a door opening into something twisted and dark that no one could have predicted. They agreed to meet in Knightdale, North Carolina, where Steven and Alyssa had moved with their 2 younger daughters. The initial reunion seemed joyful. Katie met her biological mother for the first time since infancy. She met her biological father. She met her 2 half-sisters. There were tears, embraces, hours of conversation about the years they had missed. Katie was searching for connection, for belonging, for a sense of where she came from, and Steven gave her exactly what she was looking for, or, at least, what she thought she was looking for. After the meeting, Katie made a decision. She wanted to move in with her biological parents at their home in Henrico County, Virginia, near Richmond. She wanted to get to know them, to build a relationship, to fill in the missing pieces of her identity. Tony and Kelly Fusco were apprehensive. They didn't know these people. They didn't know what kind of environment Katie would be walking into. But they respected Katie's autonomy as an adult. They supported her decision, even though every parental instinct told them something was wrong. Katie packed her things and moved to Virginia. She had no idea what she was walking into. By the time Katie arrived at the Henrico County house, Steven and Alyssa's marriage was already falling apart. They were sleeping in separate bedrooms. The relationship that had started with grooming and abuse 2 decades earlier was finally crumbling. Alyssa was ready to leave. She'd endured years of verbal and emotional abuse, and she was done. But Steven's behavior changed the moment Katie walked through the door. Alyssa noticed it immediately. Steven, who had always dressed in baggy jeans and oversized shirts, suddenly started wearing skinny jeans and form-fitting clothes. He shaved his beard. He let his hair grow long. He was transforming himself, trying to look younger, trying to be something he wasn't. He became obsessed with spending time with Katie. He'd take her on outings, just the two of them. He'd buy her things, clothes, art supplies, whatever she wanted. He made her feel special, seen, like she was the most important person in his world. To Katie, it probably felt like the fatherly affection she'd been searching for. But to Alyssa, it looked like something else entirely, something that made her stomach turn. About 6 weeks after Katie moved in, Alyssa woke up in the middle of the night and noticed Steven wasn't in his bed. She walked down the hall and found him sleeping on the floor in Katie's room. She didn't say anything that night. Maybe she was trying to convince herself it was innocent, that he'd fallen asleep talking to her, that there was a reasonable explanation. But the next night, he did it again. Alyssa confronted him.
"What are you doing?"
she demanded. "Why are you sleeping in her room?" Steven's response was cold, final. "None of your business." He stormed out of the house with Katie. That was the moment Alyssa knew for certain. This wasn't about reconnecting with a long-lost daughter. This was something sick, something dangerous. Alyssa tried to warn Katie. She sat her down and told her everything about how Steven had groomed her when she was 15, about the abuse she'd endured, about how he'd hurt baby Denise, how he'd pinched her until she was covered in bruises, how he'd stuffed her in a cooler until she nearly suffocated. "He's dangerous," Alyssa said. "You need to leave. You need to get away from him." But Katie didn't believe her, or maybe she didn't want to believe her. She was 18 years old, desperate for her biological father's approval, and convinced that Alyssa was just jealous or bitter or lying. In November 2016, Alyssa finally moved out. She took her 2 younger daughters with her, leaving Steven and Katie alone in the house. Alyssa and Steven shared custody of the younger girls, but Alyssa was free. For the first time in over 2 decades, she was out from under Steven's control. But she couldn't stop worrying about Katie. She called, she texted, she begged Katie to see the truth. But Katie wouldn't listen. Alyssa had escaped, but Katie stayed behind. Quick question: what time is it where you are right now? Are you watching this late at night? Early morning? Let me know below. In May 2017, Alyssa's 11-year-old daughter came home from visiting her father. She seemed upset, withdrawn. Alyssa asked what was wrong, but the girl didn't want to talk about it. Later that night, Alyssa found her daughter's journal lying open on the bed. She shouldn't have read it. She knew that. But something told her she needed to. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Childish handwriting, misspelled words, drawings scattered throughout, and then she saw it. Entries describing the incestuous relationship between Steven and Katie. Details about Katie's pregnancy. Notes about how she and her sister had been told to refer to Katie as their stepmother. One drawing showed Steven with horns, labeled simply, "The Devil." Alyssa felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. She'd feared this. She'd warned Katie. But seeing it confirmed in her daughter's handwriting made it real in a way that nothing else could. She immediately called Steven. Her voice was shaking. "Is Katie pregnant with your baby?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Steven's voice, calm and unbothered. "I thought you knew. We're in love." "We're in love." The words hung in the air like poison. Alyssa wanted to scream, to reach through the phone and shake him, to make him see how sick and twisted this was. But she knew it wouldn't matter. Steven didn't care. He never had. She hung up and called the police. She filed a report, explaining everything: the journal entries, the confession, the pregnancy. She did everything she was supposed to do. She reported it. She tried to stop it. But the system moved slowly, and Steven and Katie kept moving forward. On July 20th, 2017, Steven Pladl and Katie Fusco got married in Parkton, Maryland. They lied on their marriage documents, claiming they were not related. It was perjury. It was illegal. But no one checked. No one stopped them. The wedding was small, uncomfortable, attended by Steven's mother, Grace Pladl, and Katie's adoptive parents, Tony and Kelly Fusco. Imagine being Tony and Kelly in that moment. Watching the daughter they raised, the girl they loved more than anything, marry her own biological father. Knowing it was wrong. Knowing she was being manipulated, but legally powerless to stop it because she was an adult making her own choices. Grace Pladl stood beside her son, her expression fixed in uneasy silence. Was she in denial? Was she complicit? It's hard to say, but she was there. Tony and Kelly watched with heartbreak etched on their faces. Katie wore a short black dress. In the wedding photo, she smiled. But there was something hollow in her eyes. A young woman who believed she had found love but was trapped in something far more sinister. On September 1st, 2017, Katie gave birth to their son. They named him Bennett Kieran Pladl, a baby boy born from an incestuous relationship, a child who never asked to be part of this nightmare. In January 2018, nearly 8 months after Alyssa first reported the incestuous relationship to authorities, Katie and Steven were finally arrested in Wake County, North Carolina. The charges: incest with an adult, adultery, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor related to Steven's younger daughters being exposed to the relationship. Both were extradited to Virginia to face trial. Steven's attorney, Rick Friedman, defended his client by emphasizing that the relationship was consensual. Katie was an 18-year-old woman when it began, he argued. She made her own choices. Steven, according to his lawyer, was head over heels in love with his daughter. Head over heels in love with his daughter. The baby he'd abused. The girl he'd groomed the moment she walked back into his life. The court ordered Steven and Katie to have no contact with each other. Bennett, now just a few months old, was placed in the custody of Steven's mother, Grace. Katie was sent back to New York to live with Tony and Kelly. For the first time since moving in with Steven, Katie was free from his influence. And slowly, painfully, she began to see the truth. Back in Dover, living with Tony and Kelly, Katie started to wake up. Not all at once. Not in some dramatic moment of clarity. But gradually, piece by piece, the fog lifted. She started therapy. Her therapist helped her understand what grooming looked like, what manipulation was, how someone could make you believe that abuse was love. Katie reconnected with old friends, people who had known her before Virginia, before Steven. They reminded her of who she used to be. The girl with dreams. The artist. The fighter for justice. For the first time, Katie was able to process what had happened to her, how she'd been groomed, manipulated, and controlled, how Steven had exploited her need for connection and belonging, how he'd twisted her desire to know her biological father into something sick and wrong. In early April 2018, Katie made the hardest decision of her life. She picked up the phone and called Steven. "I can't do this anymore," she told him. "It's over." For Steven, the breakup was catastrophic. His entire identity had become wrapped up in controlling Katie. She was his obsession, his possession, and now she was slipping away. He withdrew completely, stopped answering calls from his attorney, Rick Friedman, stopped going outside. He sat alone in the darkened Nightdale house, the blinds drawn, the lights off. Friends and family who checked on him said he seemed empty, hollowed out. But Steven wasn't just grieving, he was planning. On the evening of April 11th, 2018, Steven drove to his mother's home in Nightdale. Grace was taking care of Bennett, the 7-month-old baby born from Steven's relationship with Katie. Steven asked to take Bennett for the night. He told Grace he planned to drive the baby to New York the next morning to see Katie. He said Katie wanted to see her son, that they were going to try to work things out. Grace hesitated. Something in Steven's eyes didn't look right. Not anger, not sadness, just emptiness. A void where a person used to be. But he was Bennett's father. And Grace wanted to believe that he was trying to do the right thing. So, she agreed. Steven loaded the baby into his car and drove away. What Grace didn't know, what no one knew, was that Steven had already made his decision. And Bennett wouldn't survive the night. Katie and Tony woke up early on the morning of April 12, 2018. They had a routine. Twice a week, they drove from Dover, New York, to Waterbury, Connecticut, to help clean Katie's grandmother's house. It was a simple act of service. The kind of thing families do without thinking about it. They climbed into Tony's red pickup truck and headed out, the morning still quiet and cool. Katie probably had her sketchbook with her. She always did. Maybe they talked about her plans for the future. Maybe they rode in comfortable silence. They didn't know that Steven had driven through the night, that he'd been following them since they left Dover, that his white van was just a few car lengths behind, waiting for the right moment. They had no idea. At 9:47 a.m. on April 12, 2018, Tony Fusco's red pickup truck came to a stop at the intersection of Route 7 and Route 55 in New Milford, Connecticut. It's a quiet intersection, the kind where you check for traffic, wait for your moment, and pull out without a second thought. Tony had probably driven through this intersection dozens of times. It was routine, boring, safe. Katie sat in the passenger seat. Maybe she was looking at her phone. Maybe she was looking out the window. Maybe she was thinking about Bennett, the baby she'd left behind. A white van pulled up alongside them. In the driver's seat, a New York firefighter named later, only as a witness, was driving a few car lengths behind. He glanced up just in time to see the van pull around the pickup truck, and then the window rolled down. Steven Pladl raised his Arrow AR-15 style rifle and aimed it through the open window, directly at Tony and Katie. The firefighter would later tell 911 dispatchers, "Someone just went by and shot somebody in a truck. The car pulled up, went around him, and shot him. Put a whole clipful into his head." The sound of the rifle was deafening. Glass exploded inward. The pickup's windows shattered in a spray of blood and fragments. Steven didn't stop. He kept firing, over and over. Methodical, precise, cold. Multiple gunshot wounds to the head, neck, and torso. Both Katie and Tony died instantly. The red pickup sat frozen at the intersection. Blood splattered across the dashboard and seats. The engine still running. The turn signal still blinking. Steven pulled away without hesitation. No looking back. No remorse. Just a white van disappearing down the road as bystanders scrambled to call 911. Katie Fusco was 20 years old. Tony Fusco was 56. They died together at a stop sign on a Thursday morning, murdered by the man who had destroyed Katie's life and couldn't bear to let her go. After the shooting, Steven drove away from the intersection. He didn't go far. He pulled over on a side road, parked the van, and picked up his phone. He called his mother, Grace. "I murdered Katie, Anthony, and Bennett," he said. His voice was calm, matter of fact, like he was reading a grocery list. Grace was in shock. She couldn't process what she was hearing. "What? What are you talking about?" "Don't go into the house," Steven continued. "Call the police. There's a key under the mat for easier entry." He hung up. Grace stood there, phone in hand, her mind racing. She wanted to believe it was a sick joke, that Steven was having some kind of breakdown, that he didn't really mean it. But she called 911 anyway, her voice shaking. She told the dispatcher what Steven had said. Officers were immediately dispatched to Steven's home in Knightdale. When police arrived at Steven Pladl's house in Knightdale, North Carolina, they found the key under the mat, just as Steven had said. They unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. They found 7-month-old Bennett Kieran Pladl dead in his crib. The medical examiner would later determine that he had been smothered. The baby had been killed the day before April 11th, the same day Steven had picked him up from Grace's house. Steven had murdered his own son before driving through the night to Connecticut. Bennett had been dead in the house while Steven was on the road, following Katie and Tony to that intersection. A baby, 7 months old, smothered by his own father. 18 miles from the shooting site in New Milford, Connecticut, police found Steven Pladl's white van parked in Dover, New York, the same town where Katie had grown up, the same town where Tony and Kelly had raised her with love and care. Steven was inside the van, slumped over in the driver's seat, a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, his AR-15 rifle beside him. He was dead. In the span of 24 hours, 3 generations were gone. A baby, a young woman, a father who had devoted his life to protecting her, all murdered by a man who couldn't accept that he'd lost control. Katie Rose Fusco, Bennett Kieran Pladl, and Anthony Charles Fusco were buried together at St. Charles Cemetery in Dover Plains, New York. A joint wake was held on April 20, 2018, at Huffcut Funeral Home in Dover Plains. Over 100 mourners attended: friends, family, neighbors, students from Dover High School, fellow Coast Guard veterans, people who had known Tony as a devoted public servant, people who had known Katie as a bright, talented artist with her whole life ahead of her, people who mourned a baby who never had a chance. The following day, April 21st, a funeral service took place at St. Charles Borromeo Catholic Church. More than 80 attendees filled the pews. An honor guard of 3 United States Coast Guard members stood at attention for Tony Fusco, honoring the 30 years he'd given to his country. The service was somber, heartbreaking, and filled with the kind of grief that doesn't have words. Kelly Fusco stood at the front of the church, surrounded by family, burying her husband and her daughter on the same day. The daughter she'd raised, the daughter she'd loved, the daughter she'd tried to protect. The community of Dover was devastated. This wasn't supposed to happen in their town. Not to people like Tony and Katie. Not to a family like the Fuscos. But it did. Because the system failed them. In the days following the murders, Alyssa Pladl spoke publicly about the case for the first time. Her voice was filled with a grief so profound it was almost unbearable to listen to. "I lost my daughter 3 times," she said. At birth, to him, and forever. At birth, when she made the impossible choice to give Denise up for adoption to save her life. To him, when Katie moved in with Steven and fell under his control. And forever, when Steven murdered her at a stop sign in Connecticut. "I hate him for everything he's done," Alyssa continued. Her voice was raw, angry, broken. "I tried to warn people. I tried to tell them he was dangerous, but no one listened. And now they're all gone." Alyssa had spent years trying to protect her children from Steven. She'd given up her firstborn to save her. She'd escaped with her 2 younger daughters. She'd reported the incestuous relationship to the police. She'd done everything she was supposed to do. And it still wasn't enough. In the aftermath of the murders, Steven's attorney, Rick Friedman, defended the court's decision to grant Steven bond after his arrest in January 2018. "Nobody could have predicted this," Friedman said. "If any judge or prosecutor believed the child would be in harm's way, there would not have been any bond. In my view, the professionals care too much about children." But critics pointed to a long list of ignored warning signs. Steven had a documented history of abusing baby Denise. Alyssa had reported the incestuous relationship months before the arrests. Steven had groomed a 15-year-old girl and isolated her from her family. He'd shown a pattern of control, manipulation, and violence that spanned decades. And yet, the court granted him bond, placed Bennett in the custody of Steven's mother, giving Steven regular access to the baby, allowed Steven to live freely while awaiting trial, with only a no-contact order standing between him and Katie. A no-contact order, a piece of paper. That was supposed to protect Katie from a man who had spent her entire life trying to control her. The case sparked widespread debate about incest laws, genetic sexual attraction, and the failures of the legal system. How could this have been prevented? What should have been done differently? Where did the system break down? The answers are complicated. But one thing is clear. Steven Pladl should never have been granted bond. He should never have had access to Bennett. And Katie should have been given more protection than a piece of paper ordering Steven to stay away. In 2024, Lifetime adapted the story into a television film titled *Husband, Father, Killer. The Alyssa Pladl story *, as part of its *, ripped from the headline's * feature films. The movie brought the case back into the public consciousness, reigniting conversations about how we protect victims of abuse and manipulation. But for the people who loved Katie, Tony, and Bennett, no movie or public debate can bring them back. Katie Rose Fusco was 20 years old when she died. She was full of talent, empathy, and dreams. She wanted to work in advertising. She wanted to move to the city. She wanted to make art that mattered. She had her whole life ahead of her. Tony Fusco was 56, a Coast Guard veteran, a corrections officer, a devoted father and husband, a man who served his community and raised a daughter who wasn't biologically his, but was his in every way that mattered. He died trying to protect her on a routine Thursday morning trip to clean his mother-in-law's house. Katie Pladl was 7 months old. He never had a chance. He was born into a nightmare and murdered by the man who should have protected him. And Steven Pladl? He was a predator from the beginning. He groomed a 15-year-old girl. He abused an infant. He controlled and manipulated everyone around him. He destroyed every life he touched. And when he finally lost control, when Katie finally broke free, he made sure no one else could have her. This case isn't just about incest or genetic sexual attraction, or the failures of the legal system, though. It's about all of those things. It's about control. It's about a man who saw people as objects to be possessed. It's about a young woman who was manipulated and groomed and ultimately murdered for daring to reclaim her own life. What could have stopped this? Where did the system fail? Maybe if the court hadn't granted Steven bond. Maybe if Bennett had been placed somewhere Steven couldn't access him. Maybe if Katie had been given real protection instead of just a no-contact order. Maybe if someone had listened to Alyssa years earlier, when she first tried to warn them. Or maybe Steven Pladl was always going to end this way. Maybe the moment Katie said, "It's over," his plan was already in motion. Maybe there was nothing anyone could have done to stop him. We'll never know for sure. What we do know is this: 3 innocent people are dead because one man couldn't let go. Because one man believed he had the right to control, to possess, to destroy. Katie deserved better. Tony deserved better. Bennett deserved better. And we, as a society, have to do better. Asterisk asterisk, this case haunts me and I know it'll haunt you too. If you want more deep dives into cases like this, subscribe and hit the bell. Drop a comment telling me what you think about genetic sexual attraction laws, the court's decision to grant Steven bond, or how Katie's story could have ended differently. And hey, what's the weather like where you are? I want to know you're real people out there processing this with me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.